Hey everyone, what's up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, your host here at Untold, and today I have a bunch of identifications for you, some kind of weird things that have happened in the true crime world, and yeah, an update on the Menendez brothers, remains found in Troy, New York. Yeah, all of that. So if that piques your interest, I highly suggest you subscribe, turn your post notifications on all that way you know whenever I upload, and like this video, comment, do all that jazz. Let's get into today's true crime cases. The first two identification cases I'm going to be talking about are that of infants. We have baby Garin and we have Mary Josephine. So baby Garin was identified on October 17th. Well, this baby's mother was arrested on October 17th of this year. But baby Garin went by baby Garin due to the fact that it was found on the side of Garin Road in Las Lomas, Monterey County, California. And this happened back in December of 1994. This baby was discovered wrapped in a blanket inside of a paper grocery bag. And the person that discovered this was a man. He was just collecting some cans on the side of the road and discovered this child. Now, this child was determined to be of a few days old, and at the time of the death, just left there for several weeks. So this infant was also determined to be male, and after obviously this discovery, like I mentioned, this baby was nicknamed Baby Garin. So the identity of this child was unknown for many years, but until the advancement in genetic forensics, with the help of this, they were able to arrest 60-year-old Pamela Ferreira. Ferreira. It looks like it's Ferreira, but there's a Y in it. So Ferreria. Um, and like I mentioned, this happened on October 17th of 2024. So not too long ago. This is the victim's mother, and she was arrested for the murder of her own child. Mary Josephine was found in December of 1993, so just a year prior to baby Garin. So this was the remains of a female infant that was discovered on the side of the Interstate 10, which was near the exit for Lorraine Road in Gulfport, Mississippi. So this infant was determined to have died via homicide, and this infant was also just 1 day old at the time of her demise. This child's remains were exhumed in hopes of using genetic forensics in order to identify her next of kin. And this child was known as Mary Josephine, or called that to humanize this child, not just as an infant, not just as baby doe. A lot of this case are being withheld due to the investigation currently at this moment, but that is because the woman in which they believe is to be the mother of Mary Josephine is currently being investigated. So they know this child's mother's identity, and at this time it is being withheld due to the ongoing investigation. But as that moves forward, I will give you guys an update. I actually have 5 more unidentifieds that were identified, or their identity was released and they are now considered solved at this time. So the first one is that of the Slidell Jane Doe, or the St. Tammany Parish Jane Doe, back from 1986. This was the case of a murdered woman whose remains were found in Lake Pontchartrain, which is near Slidell, Louisiana. So this case, back in June of 1986, there was a fisherman that discovered the remains of this unidentified individual. This person's body was weighed down in the lake, and this was near Slidell, Louisiana. So Slidell is outside of New Orleans, like northwest of New Orleans, and members of the Water Patrol Division for the St. Tammany Parish responded and then were able to locate this deceased female. And this deceased female, it said, was about 40 yards from the eastbound side of the Interstate 10 and 34 yards from the, a pier, which is off of Howes Beach Service Road. This female was relocated to the end of Rat's Nest Road, which is now called Lakeview Drive, and that was near a restaurant. This woman was determined to be pregnant at the time of her demise, and she was estimated to be in her early 20s. Her remains were then brought to the St. Tammany Parish Coroner's Office for her autopsy. Her death was ruled a homicide. She was approximated between 20 to 30 years of age. She was about 126 pounds, and she was 5'4" in height. So as of 2008, her case was uploaded to NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, or NAMUS as for short, as UP852, and she became known as the Slidell Jane Doe, or the St. Tammany Jane Doe, or the Lake Pontchartrain Jane Doe. So with the help of Louisiana State University FACES Lab, they were able to develop a forensic approximation of what this Jane Doe would look like as she was living. And this case would be featured on America's Most Wanted in hopes of having some new leads. The state crime lab and the DNA lab for St. Tammany Parish Coroners DNA lab also would do DNA testing on this Jane Doe. But despite any of those efforts that they did, they found no matches for this Jane Doe. Her case went cold. None of that. So back in 2022, the St. Tammany Sheriff's Office then submitted the forensic evidence they had to Othram to determine who this woman was. And Othram then built her DNA profile, her genome, for sequencing, and they were able to follow up with this information and find potential relatives, as they do in most of these cases. And this led to the DNA profile of an unknown woman. This then would lead them to identifying the St. Tammany Jane Doe, the Lake Pontchartrain Jane Doe, the Slidell Jane Doe as that of Pamela-lee-Hupp, who was 28 years old at the time of her death, and she was pregnant with her second child. She was born back on April 28th of 1958. This investigation is still ongoing, and it's active at this time. So that we know of is her state that she was pregnant with her second child, her age, she was 28, and her name, Pamela-Lee-Hupp, so that she is no longer an unidentified Jane Doe in the state of Louisiana. Back on August of 1994, two men discovered remains of an unidentified human on Lake Mead Boulevard near the Lake Mead Recreation Area. This is a small drive outside of Las Vegas. These men were hiking and they found these remains in a dirt turnout. It was then determined that this was of a Caucasian female. This woman was found in like a washout area, and had been dragged to this area. So on the next day, the Clark County Coroner's Office determined that these remains belonged to that of Melanie White. Melanie White was 27 years old and she had died due to strangulation and blunt force trauma. So this was a homicide case. The LVMPD went into this investigation. They had many leads, and these leads were received and tracked. None of them were successful in identifying who was responsible for Melanie's death. So in 2010, this is when the cold case detectives in Vegas then reviewed the case and submitted any forensic evidence or any evidence in particular from this crime scene for any DNA testing. There was an STR profile that was developed of an unknown male suspect. This profile then was submitted to CODIS, but there was no match. In 2021, there was further funding provided to the Vegas Justice League and to the LVMPD, and they submitted this evidence to Othram. And using the genome sequencing, they then were able to build a profile and determine that this DNA led to the positive identification of that of Arthur Lavery, who grew up around Vegas. He was born back on September 7th of 1955. He was 38 years old when he murdered Melanie White, but unfortunately he died back in 2021. So at this time, this case marks the 12th case in the state of Nevada in which the killer's marks were identified using the technology by Othram. Our last unidentified case is that of the Bartholomew County John Doe of 1999, or Columbus John Doe, whatever you want to call him. But this is in Columbus, but it's through the Bartholomew County Prosecutor's Office. So back in January of 1999, there were remains of an unidentified male that were found off of State Route 46 and Interstate 65 in Columbus. Columbus is south of Indianapolis, if you wanted to know that. So the CPD responded to the scene. They discovered this adult white male. He was about 6 feet tall, 270 pounds, and they believed him to be either in his 50s or 60s. There were 2 guns also found by the man's body, and it was determined that he died via a single GSW. They did not believe that foul play was involved. So over the years following his discovery, they tried to identify this man. They used many different methods. They tried fingerprints. They tried news bulletins, news releases, entering his depictions into the databases. They even used a forensic sketch artist to depict what this man looked like, and it was released to the public. They even uploaded his details into NamUs as UP11377. But despite the investigators' attempt, nothing helped. This John Doe was finally identified with the help of Othram, and this John Doe is that of Leo Michael Murray. Leo Michael Murray is or was a resident of Ohio, and he was about 61 years old at the time of his death. He never had any children, never was married, but prior to his death, he disappeared. He told his family that he was moving to Florida, but his family never reported him missing because they just assumed he moved to Florida and lived there, which does happen. I mean, there's a lot of cases of missing or unidentified John or Jane Does where their family finds out that, hey, this is my relative that I just thought moved to another state because that's what they told us. You know what I mean? But this is the 10th case in the state of Indiana in which the state officials or the officials working on the case have publicly identified a decedent with the help of Othram. Back on October 21st of this year, there were remains found in Troy, New York. So police were investigating remains found in Burden Pond Preserve. The person that found them were just going on a walk, and they found these remains near Burden Falls in South Troy. Now, according to the Times-Union in Albany, these were human and secured in the area. These remains appear to be those of a non-adult, mid to late teenager. So there is a lot of speculation, or was a lot of speculation with this. People thinking this was Jalik Rainwalker. Jalik Rainwalker has been missing for years. He disappeared back in 2007, but it is determined that these bones do not belong to Jalik Rainwalker. This was the update as of the 23rd. Obviously, because Jalik Rainwalker's case was very prominent, it was thought that this would be him. He was a 12-year-old boy that went missing from Greenwich almost 20 years ago. But the dental comparison done that was conducted by the Troy Police Department of this non-adult set of remains at Burden Pond Reserve do not match that of Jalik Rainwalker. It's kind of like how people feel about, or that feeling, I would assume people feel the same way when it comes to the Kimberly Moreau case of the remains that were found in Maine, how it wasn't her either. It's one of those things where you're just like, oh, dang. And because it's been an ongoing investigation, it's one of those things where you're like, you want that positive ending for a case. You want justice to be served. So the last update they have for these remains is a statement that was given on this past Wednesday, by the Detroit Police Department, and it goes further into how this isn't Jaleel Rainwalker. So it talks about the analysis that they already conducted, that this is not Jaleel Rainwalker. There is a scheduled analysis to occur next week in hopes of figuring out age, identity, and gender of these remains that were discovered. I would assume that they probably would do further dental record, probably search, and go into genetics in order to discover who these remains are. We don't know what the state of these remains are. It didn't say, it just said that it was skeletal. We don't know if there's anything still on the bones, anything like that, or anything else found at the scene. We don't know because, I mean, they were found near water in woods. So that is all up in the air. But if you have any information when it comes to these remains that were found in Troy, please call the Troy Police Department at 518-270-4421, or you can report them online at troypd.gov. So last but not least, we're going to be talking about the Menendez brothers. So obviously, as people are aware, their case is more prominent now. And the reason for that is because of what just came out. So the Menendez brothers might be set free. And the reason I say this is because there was a press conference, or just a conference. I don't even think it was considered a conference. It was a release by the district attorney for Los Angeles. So George Gascon on Thursday filed a motion to recommend new sentencing for the Menendez brothers, Erik and Lyle. So this was a decision that came as a decision that was made in review of the new evidence that came to light that the defense attorneys presented in 2023. This pointing to the abuse and showing more of the actual abuse by their father, Jose Menendez. Now, Gascon went on to tell CNN on Thursday, this just happened 2 days ago, as you're watching this, 3 days ago, that he will never excuse murders, those that are brutal, that are premeditated. He's talking about the Menendez brothers with this. They were appropriately sentenced at the time when they were tried. They got life without parole. He thinks that with the current state of law and given reassessing their behavior in prison, they deserve an opportunity to be reevaluated and perhaps reintegration into the community. So a hearing could be held within the next 30 to 45 days when a LA Superior Court judge makes a final decision whether or not the brothers will be resentenced. So Gascon supports resentencing them to life with the possibility of parole, which means 50 years to life in prison. Because these crimes happened when both of the brothers were under the age of 26, per the California law, they would be eligible for youthful parole if they got sentenced to life with parole. He further went on to talk about their behavior in prison. They've had good behavior in prison. They've never made it hard for themselves. They've always abided by the rules and things like that. And he even said that they're model prisoners. He believes there's a good chance that they could be paroled if the decision is reached by the parole board, because this has to be approved by the parole board, approved by the Menendez brothers and their attorneys, or attorney, and the judge. And the attorney for one of the brothers says that they hope that they will be home by Thanksgiving. And this would be the first time in more than 35 years after the death of their parents that this case is going to be re-examined. Now, obviously, at the time of this murder, they were arrested less than a year after the murder of their parents, Kitty and Jose Menendez, in 1990. And their sons were 21 and 18 at the time, and they were convicted in 1996 of first-degree murder. They had 2 different high-profile trials, which a lot of people have now learned about. The first one, which is where they introduced the essay and the physical abuse by their father, Jose. And the first case, which was one of the first ones televised, ended in a mistrial because the jury was deadlocked. hence why they went to trial a second time. And in the second time, the evidence that the defense wanted to re-present was excluded from the trial, and this is what ended with their sentence to life in prison. There's more factors that led to this recommendation, and they had to take a lot of things into consideration. So Gascon believes that they, obviously, like I mentioned, he believes they were appropriately sentenced over 30 years ago, but their case needs to be reevaluated. His decision was made an hour before this announcement was made on Thursday, and not everybody in the DA office agrees with him. He said that, and obviously with the help of a lot of their family members too, this recommendation of resentencing includes that obviously there's no denying these boys lived in a very dysfunctional, abusive home for many years where there was SA involved, there was SM involved, and it was made very clear, very clear, that all of this was happening. There's substantial evidence that all of this was happening. And the DA believes that they have served enough time in regards to their crime. Obviously, there's no way to properly voice this or say that they've served a justifiable amount of time for killing their parents. There's no way to properly say that because it sounds very bizarre. But with the help of the new evidence that was presented by, brought into evidence in 2023 in regards to Roy Rosselló, who is a former Menudo boy band member, and he talked about the essay that Jose did on him in the 1980s. And this was all a part of the new evidence that was presented by the attorneys of the Menendez brothers, in which also had a letter that Erik wrote to his cousin a few months before the murders, and it talks about the abuse that he went through. So also in this motion, it basically has a whole laid out, detailed rehabilitation plan for the brothers, how they would be released, in just all the efforts of rehabilitating them back into the public, which could potentially be very rough. What their life would look like the first few months of reintegration, what their life would look like the first few years of reintegration. If you've never read somebody's reintegration plan or the steps they have to do in order to be reintegrated into society, it can be rough. These boys I call them boys, but they're men now. These men have not been out free in years. They finally get to be there with their wives physically, not just emotionally. So that's another huge step when it comes to them. They get to be outside of a prison cell and people that they've known for years for the first time in over 30 years. Them being in prison has been their norm for the last 3 decades. Them being out in the public is going to be extremely hard. I do hope this doesn't happen with a lot of cases, with a lot of high profile cases, but I do hope that there is some protection for these men if they are indeed released, because there is going to be some crazies that will try and go after them. And I know that their families, whether they are pro this or against this, their families will work really hard to make sure they're safe, and so will their spouses. But because this is such a high profile case, there is a lot of safety concerns for them, not the public, for the Menendez brothers themselves, because this is such a high profile case and so many people know about them, know exactly where they are, prison wise where they are. It might be a good idea for all of those involved to help with their safe passage over the next few years to make sure that they are okay and they are, in an undisclosed location, whether they stay in California or not after they're released. But it might be some good intentions to do that. Just a concerned citizen, like looking out for their best interest. That might be one of the roads that the Los Angeles district's office, DA's office might want to look into, and their lawyers as well. Where, I mean, yes, they committed murder, but they've never done anything to substantiate a life of crime after that, even with being in prison. So whether or not they are paroled will lie upon the parole board. If the parole board agrees to this, then the resentencing will happen this is all according to the district attorney's office. And there is absolutely nothing political about this. This is what he spoke about during this conference as well, that this is not, somebody suggested this is a political move for him, but he said that there's nothing political about this. He just wants to make sure that justice is served the correct way, and that hopefully these brothers will be released by Thanksgiving to their families, to their wives, and that they've served enough time for the crimes that they have committed. And a bunch of their family members as well, both sides, have talked about how this is now a day filled of hope for their family, in hopes of having them released back to the general population, or Gen Pop. I was going to say Gen Pop, but Gen Pop is a term in prison. So what are your thoughts? Let me know. Leave them in a comment down below. I have a lot of thoughts about this. Yes, they did commit patricide, but there are people that commit murder that are released back to the general public, and where they have not committed another heinous crime, they have been model citizens in prison, they have proven to rehabilitate themselves, they have been a part of SA survivor like boards and things like that. They've shown over the years how they can be a normal person in society, not just a murderer. So again, like I said, leave a comment down below. I would love to know. And that is my true crime recap of the week. I hope you guys had a good one. Enjoy all the links down below for all these cases, and I'll see you guys in the next one.